I would like to welcome everyone here to our City Commission meeting here in this Christmas season. In our first order of business, we're going to stand and we're going to do the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first item on our list is the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve.
I'll second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, and then on our regular agenda, item number 3, we're going to consider a proclamation declaring December 30, 2022 as Envisioning Your Future Day. And I believe Caitlin Andrist is going to be our hostess.
Hi. My name's Caitlin Andrist, and I'm a senior at K-State. I compete in Miss Kansas, and I absolutely love the communities, and so Envisioning Your Future Day is just allowing these kids in these schools to really take charge of who they want to be and just have that mindset that they're capable of anything. Whereas committing to everyday life can be a challenge with daily expectations, rules, and guidelines, trying to shape us into a box for the future. When putting people into a social standard, we are tearing them down, their self-confidence and self-esteem. We are taking away the power of being authentic and committing to ourselves. Together as a community, we can create an impactful future by empowering one another to envision our futures. And whereas to make social change, we must create new mindsets and opportunities to empower one another through creativity and conversation. Therefore, I am proclaiming to bring awareness towards one's future's goals, aspirations, and dreams. These thoughts and feelings can be introduced through creating vision boards. This allows an individual to use their mind to explore their future through art, words, and crafting. And whereas creating vision boards allows one to express their leadership qualities by committing to themselves to take charge of their future. Creating a healthy balance for allowing ourselves to be fully dedicated to a day of becoming the best version of ourselves. Recognizing and envisioning what we genuinely want for our future and not the box we are put into. Whereas when we create a vision board, we are creating a social change aspect, showing support, love, hope, and unity between our Newton community. Compassion and understanding are somewhat rare to have in this world. A person who understands who they are and speaks their truth is powerful. Power and peace come hand in hand. And whereas every year on this day, we will celebrate the visions we have for our future, allowing us to think outside the box and express the box that society tries to put us into. Let this be a reminder to anyone at any age can take back their life and create the life they deserve. Everyone deserves happiness and good things. Growing, healing, and experience creates our journey and words for our vision boards. We need to commit to confidence, envisioning a more confident you.
Now therefore, I, Leroy Kane, Mayor of the City of Newton, Kansas, do hereby declare December 30, 2022, Envisioning Your Future Day.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll need a motion.
I move that we accept the proclamation and declare Envisioning Your Future Day as designated in the proclamation.
I'll second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that is passed. Take just a couple seconds here while I sign my name.
Before I moved here from Ulysses, I was the auditor for the Miss Southwest Kansas pageant for 26 years.
That's awesome. I actually just competed about a month ago there.
Did you really?
I'll be competing for Dodge in about 2 weeks.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, good for you. Okay, item number 4 on our agenda is we're going to receive bids and award contract for the Newton Public Library Improvement Project. Suzanne?
Yes, Commissioners. As you are aware, we've been working on this project for quite a while. You've heard all the details, and our public bid opening was held on December 21st at 11 o'clock. We had 6 bidders that submitted bids. 5 were read aloud. One of the bidders had not acknowledged the addenda in the packet, and therefore their bid was not read. There were 4 with valid that had all alternates that were provided. You can see that from the bid tab. It's the 4 to the right. That'd be Icon Structures, Law Company, Hutton Construction, and Donlinger Construction. Staff, along with the architects, remember HBM Architects is the one that has been working this project. We reviewed the bids and the alternates and recommend taking these 6 add alternates, but not the deduct alternate. The deduct alternate, the work would still need to be done, but a quote was received from the architect for that work. That work would be coming from one of the vendors that would be doing some of the interior work that would be bid out through the FF&E, more the furniture and interior and some of the shelves and things like that. And their price was higher, so we want to go ahead and leave this in the bid. It will make the project less expensive, so we don't want to deduct it out, okay? And because the bids they all came in good, and the low bid was under the estimate, so we would recommend that the commission would award bids to Donlinger Construction for the $7,805,500. Remember, this is not the last piece of the project. We still will bring back to you in January or February. The architect is still working on the bid packet for the interior furnishing items, and we'll bring that back to you before we put that portion out to bid, and then we'll have the full dollar amount. But we believe that we can go ahead and take these alternates and still remain under budget.
Can you refresh the public here of what our engineer's estimate was?
For this portion, it was $8,300,119. That was the architect's estimate. Remembering, though, we still have the other second piece of the project to come along, and that is the interior items.
Okay.
That's the beauty of bidding things this time of the year, isn't it?
This, I was very, very excited, yes. Because as you know, the bidding climate has been all over the place. And for us to have this many bidders interested in the project that paid attention to it, we had, conversations going back and forth prior to the bid opening, and then to receive this many good bids and a bid that is, lower than the estimate is fantastic.
Yeah, very much so. Well, shall we entertain a motion?
I move that we award the bids to Donlinger Construction, the lowest bidder.
I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, it is passed.
Thank you.
Next item, number 5, we're going to consider a memorandum of understanding with the Central Kansas Community Foundation. Rebecca?
Yep. Yes, Mayor and Commission. What we have before you today is an MOU in partnership with our Main Street Choose Newton organization and the Community Foundation. They will be operating a fund to utilize for community and reinvestment in the downtown Main Street area. The fund will be used for the beautification items that are identified by the Main Street Choose Newton group. Some of the things that they're looking for initially would be to do a downtown PA system and update some of our Christmas ornaments and other types of those aesthetic improvements. But this is just a good way for people to be able to donate and get that tax exemption, and us to be able to reinvest in the community. So.
All right, anybody else have any questions?
I might ask you, Chris. I'm the treasurer of the Central Kansas Community Foundation. I'm also on the Main Street deal. Should I abstain?
I would, in an abundance of caution, I would suggest that you do abstain, and then we can talk about that further. But I think for now, yeah, I think that would be wise. Thank you.
Well,
And that's just
shall we entertain a motion?
I'd make that motion.
Yeah, I would second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed?
And I abstain.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next item of business is number 6, and we're going to have the quiet zone discussion. That is Suzanne.
Yes, Commissioners, we've talked about this multiple times. In fact, multiple commissions have talked about this multiple times over the years. Many discussions about railroad horn noises here in Newton. We've had some citizens that are very concerned and wanted to know options that the city could pursue. I want to go over a few of the facts that we've talked about previously, just as a reminder to you and maybe those that might be listening that haven't heard these, that the quiet zones carry with them many requirements. Each crossing must have gates, flashing lights, warning time devices, et cetera. They must be at least a half a mile in total length. So if we were looking at a quiet zone, we can't just look at one crossing here in Newton. We have to look at multiples because they are in close proximity. You can kind of see on the screen, the map shows the distances between crossings. And so anything that is at least a half a mile in total length, we have to look at a half a mile for a quiet zone. And they must not have a non-quiet zone crossing within a quarter mile of the first or the last crossing in the quiet zone. So anything within 1,320 feet either direction would have to be included. So you can't just look at one crossing by itself. They must include safety-specific improvements that reduce the risk at the crossing. Some of those might be detrimental to business properties adjacent to those crossings and their current access, and I want to talk a bit about that. And there cannot be any fatality accidents at the crossings within the past 5-year period. So I want to look, we'll get into this a bit. I will also, though, before we get into the specific locations that I wanted you to see, I did want to mention, I put in the packet today, and Aaron may provide this information out through social media as well and on our website. The federal train horn rule requires that engineers begin to sound their horns 20 to 25 seconds in advance of each grade crossing. They're required to sound a pattern of 2 long, 1 short, and 1 long blast. It's as if we planned this. Do you hear one coming? That long blast until the lead car occupies the crossing. The horn sound is required to be between 96 and 110 decibels. If the locomotive engineers are sounding horns excessively, which is some of the comments that we have certainly received from citizens over the years, I personally have heard this from multiple individuals. The complaints can be reported through the Federal Railroad Administration's web address, and I've provided that here, so they can be tracked and assigned to the FRA inspectors. Because if someone is not sounding their horn properly, and if it's excessive, you can report that. But you do need to know the date that the excessive noise was heard, have the approximate time of day, and then the location in town. And that's important here because, you know, obviously when you're looking at multiple crossings, they have to know which one that happened at if it didn't happen at all of those. Also, if the crossings have signals and arms blocking it and there's no rail activity, citizens can communicate blocked rail crossings to the appropriate party by utilizing the blocked crossing incident reporter. And I've given you the website here for that as well, and they can also call the railroad, and I've given the number for that. This information was provided to me by the Federal Railroad Inspector that I talked to about these items, and I think that's important for the public to have that information at their fingertips. Okay. Because we have 8 different crossings on the BNSF line, and that has the most trains per day that's going on that BNSF line. Remember, we don't have just one rail line in town, we have more than one. But because of that, this would be the best line to focus on, because when you're looking at a quiet zone, you got to tell which specific rail line you're dealing with, which rail. So BNSF is the best option. In the core area of the city, the crossings are very close together, like I mentioned, at the High Street, 7th Street, and Broadway crossings, and we would need to be considering all of those together if we're looking at those. Improvements that would be likely required for a complete quiet zone, and I call it a complete quiet zone because that is not just wayside horns. So I want you to think about, we've got multiple options to consider here. So if we're looking for a complete quiet zone at Broadway and BNSF, which means they wouldn't be sounding their horn, there would just be the dinging bells. If we're looking at nothing to be blown at the crossing, we've got to have closure of the adjacent property access drives, fencing to block traffic from crossing behind the arms, and you have to have medians in place. And so if you look at the Broadway crossing, this kind of gives you some idea. I've tried to note the length that would be required. We do have some smaller medians that would be in place at some of these today, but they would need to be extended. And so here's Broadway today, okay? And then you got your BNSF track that's running through here. Here's Walnut. There would need to be medians shown here and at both of these locations for this length on Broadway, and then also on Walnut, and it's going to end up crossing one of these spurs that comes into the mill. Also, because someone could come out this drive, now these are not my rules, remember, these rules go along with if you're looking at a quiet zone, and the rail company itself and the Federal Railroad are going to look at these. They would look for closure of this drive entrance here. They would look for closure of this entrance here, if you're picturing this in your mind. So here's the eastern entrance into the mill on the north side of Broadway. They would also be looking at fencing that would come along here, because currently there are vehicles that, and typically I think it's a railroad vehicles that are running through here. But there would need to be fencing here and on the north side of Broadway, so that nobody could in any way try to go around the gates that would end up being here on all of these medians. And we have the gates there today, but they're expecting them to be extended and there to be no way for somebody to go around. And I don't think this is going to work for us as a community because of the access issues with these developments.
When you say closure of those drives, is that a permanent closure, or can it be controlled with arms?
There could be arms, and it's a whole point system. Seems like everything we deal with, there are point systems. And so you might have a number of points and things that would be considered in your formula when you're looking at this if there were arms. But if you can still go around them in some way, then they are not going to be acceptable to them. So this one might work, but maybe not this one. And that's just something that would have to be pursued, and discussions would need to be had with the railroad and all those that would be reviewing all of this, okay? The other location that I did want you to take, to look at would be at Main Street. So we have medians here now, but they would need to be extended slightly longer. And then this 4th Street crossing, because we do have an arm there, but it's within the distance where you could get around it, they would want a closure here. And then there is a parking lot that goes in to the depot at this location. And they would probably want this closed as well. That's based on the rules that I'm reading for this and the individuals that I've talked to about the project. Then there would probably need to be fencing at this location as well, and possibly along here. You know, we've got the fencing that runs along kind of the south side of the tracks along Railroad Park, but there's nothing here. And I know this is an access point for railroad staff at this location. So I'm not sure this one would work for the quiet zone, where you would not have nobody blowing a horn here. However, with all of that considered, I do think that we would have an option for wayside horns. Now, the wayside horn rule, and what happens is you mount a horn to the signals that are there, or you put up a new pole, and if it was going to sound here, it's going to blow and direct that noise up and down Main Street only, instead of the train that's going to be coming along and they would be blowing it down the tracks. These wayside horns, they direct the noise to the traffic that's going to be coming at that crossing. That horn has to be tied into the rail crossing, all of the signals. And there is a process that we would have to go through for that. When you're looking at quiet zones, in order to achieve a quiet zone, the crossings and all of the items that are put in place, whether it's medians, it's fencing, it's closure of drives, whatever it is, wayside horns, all of this has to be put into what's called a quiet zone risk index. And that risk index you have to look at that based on the threshold to make sure that it's going to be safe once you do that. And there is a process that you have to go through. You do have to work with the railroad to do that. And there is significant study that has to be done to determine if it would work at these locations. We might still need to put up do some median reconstruction at some of these places. And in all of these options, the city is going to bear the burden of the cost. Even for the wayside horns, the cost for wayside horn installations, I have talked with the city of Lenexa, I've talked with Derby that is looking at this as well. They are roughly estimated at $150,000 to $270,000 per crossing. Now, that is all going to depend on whether the existing BNSF signals need to be updated to a constant warning system, or do they already have that in place? At a couple of these crossings, I know they do. But remember, we've got some that are so close, we can't deal with just, Main Street could be looked at by itself, but I believe Broadway is close enough, it has to be tied in. But if you get Broadway tied in, then you do have to look at 7th Street and High Street as well. So these things are tied together so that we can make sure that our quiet zone risk index is lower or equal to the nationwide significant risk threshold. There are certain improvements that are supplemental safety measures and alternative safety measures that have to be considered, and cost estimates that need to be prepared. If we were willing to close a crossing, which I'm not sure that we would be, the only place we might consider it is over here in this area, but because of the fact we don't have very many options to cross going east and west or north and south in our town, and when we're talking about emergency services being able to respond, I don't believe that we would want to close any of these crossings. If we were going to close a crossing, there might be funds available to assist, because what the railroad is wanting to do in all instances is to have less crossings so that there's less to worry about with that vehicle or pedestrian incident with a train. The other issue to consider is we do have a lot of events that we hold on Main Street, and we have to do detours around Main Street. And when we do that, we have to have a place to send the traffic. And if we're going to shut down any of these crossings, oftentimes those get used to detour traffic. So we want to be careful of that as well when we're looking at this from a community-wide perspective. After visiting with everybody about this, I do believe that it's possible that we might be able to look at and would qualify for the wayside horn option on some of these crossings. Positively, it would be an option. Well, I say positively, it would be an option for Southwest 24th. But you remember, we have rail line that is running on mainline rail for BNSF, and then not too far to the west is the rail that turns and goes to the west. And so that becomes a bit of a trip up in the calculation. Southwest 14th would be an option, except for it has access issues just like the other. The entrance to the wastewater treatment plant, the entrance for the bike path that goes along here is very close. First Street, if you picture that in your mind, I didn't put all the aerials for all these locations up here, but they're all very similar with access issues, and typically it's industrial development access issues along that rail line. But the wayside horn option is something that could be considered even with some of the access points. But what we're going to need is somebody that is more familiar with all of this process. We need to, if you want to consider looking at these improvements, and if you're looking at, if you want to look at the total cost of improvements, again, at each location, you're going to be looking anywhere from probably $150,000 to $270,000 at each location. If we want to consider that, we need to get an engineering consultant that does these types of studies that can be provided to the railroad, and all of those that need to look at whether this is viable for them, because the railroad has to buy in on this. And so we would do this in a partnership type setup. So we would need to decide, do you want to move forward with an engineering study? And it would be my recommendation, if you're going to look at one, you ought to look at all of them, and let's determine which ones would work. Because I don't think it's fair to say, okay, we want to look at it for this part of the community, but not this part. I think we need to look at the community as a whole if we're going to consider it.
What do you think would be a ballpark estimate for that engineering study if we included all of the crossing?
If we were including all of them, I think you're going to be looking around 50 to 60,000.
Is that just for the wayside engineering or the quiet zone engineering
It would
as
look
well?
at the full,
Okay.
the full issue. It's going to look at all of it and determine what things would need to be put in place, what would qualify, and it would have cost estimates for those individual improvements. Again, it'll be rough, but it's going to give us some idea exactly what would need to be put in place at each of those locations. And then it would be brought back to you, and then we could determine what would work for our community. And we need to take some input from the public on this, but in order for us to get to that point, I think the next step is to look at an engineering study. And if you're wanting to do that, then I would suggest that you direct us to go ahead and put together an RFQ. I've started on that already, assuming that you might say that. That we would send out an RFQ to those engineering firms that do this type of work, and then we would choose a consultant and bring back to you the recommendation, and then go from there. But again, we do have to have the funding to move forward with this.
Have you talked to anybody that's heard those directional horns?
Yes, I talked at length with the gentleman who handled this in Lenexa, and they're working well. They've had them in place there for a couple of years now. It takes about 3.5 years once you get your study rolling to get everything taken care of. And they've had them in place for 2 years, and they've been pretty successful. In the beginning, it's a little bit difficult because you are training, all of these words that mean two different things. You're training the engineers that are running the trains on the tracks to remember, and they put up signage so they know at this location you don't need to blow your horn because there is the wayside horns, and there's lights that are tied into, with that horn tied into their system. The other issue with this is if we were going to pursue that and say the wayside horn would work at multiple locations and we want to move forward with that, we do not have an electrician on staff. And so we're going to have to contract with an electrical firm. We're going to have them on contract because if something goes wrong, we're going to need to send somebody out to take care of it. The responsibility for maintenance of these systems will be that of the city of Newton.
I'm curious about the effectiveness when most of our intersections are actually at crossroads. So you're actually sending the noise down both north, south, east, and west and
At
the same
multiple
time.
locations, that's true. For instance, like 8th and High.
Right.
Think about at that location.
And then you have the one right next to it. You know? So
Yeah.
what are you really cutting down?
Yeah, that would be my question is, okay, you go through all this and it costs you whatever, $300,000, $600,000, but then you cut down what decibel level from a train horn to a Wayfair horn, or what are you
The
going to be
decibels are going to be at the same decibel level. It's just going to be directed. It is in a more specific direction, where when it's on the train, it's kind of going all over the community.
So if you're shooting it right down Main Street
You're gonna hit the
and you're
middle.
outside, it's going to be a lot louder, I would imagine.
On Main Street itself, I would think it will be similar.
Yeah, similar.
Yes.
Okay.
If we get to the point that you want to move forward with this, I talked with Derby this morning, the city of Derby. We did a bunch of phone tag playing, and I've looked at their study that they did, and they had, remember I said if you've had any fatalities within 5 years, then what can also happen is if you have a fatality after you put this in place, then there might be some backward movement on where you're allowed to have a quiet zone and not. And so you may put the improvements in, and then you may not be able to utilize that for a period of time until it's reevaluated. Derby had a study done in 2017, and then they've had a fatality, and so they had to wait 5 years before they could consider moving forward. They are now getting ready to do an additional study to their original study to look at wayside horns, and at the point when they're ready to bring somebody in, they're going to try to get somebody to come in. And I know they did this in Lenexa too, where they will do kind of a pilot where they will shoot that wayside horn. We'll give the date and the time that it's going to occur so that people can be in the area and hear what it's going to sound like. See how it's going to sound different than your regular engine that would be crossing the grade crossing. That there may be a cost involved, but I think it probably would be important for us to hear that and know that. And so we'll be talking about that as we move forward as well.
What would you like from us today?
I have went as far as I can go with this, and so if you want to pursue any of this, then I need you to give us direction to
Issue the RFQ at least.
to issue an RFQ. If you want to move forward with an engineering study, then I need you to give us direction to issue an RFQ. If you don't want to consider any of this, then let's state that, and we leave things as is.
So if you issue the RFQ, and what, a month or?
We would, I think we will have it ready to send out in January. And then they will need probably 3 to 4 weeks to submit a proposal. Then we'll review the proposals, and then we would have a final, we would select a consultant from that group that is familiar with this type of work. We would then have a contract prepared and bring to you for your consideration. And then we would move forward with the study that's going to take several months for them to get everything in place and to consider what of these different types of improvements would work to get the right scenario so that we could be considered for different quiet zone applications at different crossings in town. So we're looking at a several-month process, but your first step is, do you want to move forward with an RFQ?
Yeah.
If you do, we need to be prepared that we're going to have to pay somebody for that.
Yeah,
And so we'll select a consultant, and then they will start their work, and then we will need to have money to be able to pay them in the coming year.
And that was my next question. Where would we find that money?
Well, that's a good question. Certainly, I think the place that you would look at, because think about train noise certainly can impact development. And community development is the location where you may have some funds available.
Economic development.
Or, I'm sorry, economic development.
Now,
Is that,
we could pay for it out of there. There's no place in any other budget to pay $60,000 out, you know. Then if you did something, then you'd probably have to bond it, and that would come out of GO bonds, which would be ad valorem tax, would pay for the
For actual
work.
improvements.
for the actual
Yeah.
improvements,
The
not the
actual
study?
Right.
Right. The only thing economic development fund would be the study.
The sales tax, Eco Devo. So is this something, I'm not sure what's in that fund right now, but is this something that we would want to consider in the next year's budget, put off a year? Or is this something that we need to look for?
We could do it out of the economic development fund now.
But we wouldn't be paying any bills until 2023.
Right,
Right.
okay.
But we do have, this is where some of the excess sales tax that we've been getting over what we have budgeted in there. And it's been, so there is a good balance in there right now.
Okay.
And we would be able to have the results and the costs and expense forecast ahead of the next budget cycle?
It'd be close. It'd be close. We would request that, but something like this could take 4 to 6 months. So if you hit the 6-month mark, that might be
Now,
close.
How long is the study good for? If we did it now and don't have the funds to act on the results, then would...
If you didn't have the funds to act on the results, you're not going to be able to get the improvements in place in 2023.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you had the funds to do it, it's not going to happen that quickly. Because you've got to pull in, once you have the study ready, you pull in the railroad, FRA gets involved, everybody's going to look at this and determine, okay, there's some, it becomes a partnership type of project, and the first thing that's going to occur is we would bring them in and start looking at crossings together and talk about how this could work, and everybody would be comfortable with it.
and it might be done in phases. And we
Yes,
probably wouldn't
certainly.
budget for this till '24, or to even the one after.
Yeah, at the soonest this would be, if you were going to do the actual improvements, would be 2024.
I'm curious, the feedback that you received from the folks in Lenexa, what were some of the descriptive words they used? I'm trying to wrap my arms around the cost-benefit analysis of the current train horn and this other horn that we're going to put in, and what people, the public's response to that is, if it's a significant positive or if it's just, well, yeah, a little bit. I'm curious. I mean, I'm having a hard time with it.
Okay, I understand your question. And the answer is they felt that it was certainly worth the effort. Now, the caveat to that is, just like we talk about with anything, their location's not exactly the same as how our location works. In fact, the gentleman that I spoke with, he looked at our rail going through town on the aerial, and he says, boy, yeah, you got a tricky one there. Because where the train goes, say everybody has mentioned Derby as something to compare to here. Remember, it's running kind of parallel with K-15 through Derby. It does separate, their town's separated somewhat. But ours is really going right through the middle of town, and that's a little bit different than the layout that they have in the Derby area. Same is true in Lenexa. It's slightly different. There was a couple of different housing developments that it really impacted, and they really liked the change. They did do a closure. They had a closure because it was in more of a rural setting where somebody was accessing a pasture from a drive entrance, and they were able to close that down, which helped their numbers, if you will, to get the wayside horns. And then it's still called a quiet zone, but it's quiet in a different way with the wayside horn use. So it's not comparing apples to apples, but they've been very pleased with it, Mayor.
The one driveway closure that I'm curious about is the one right next to the train station. That's a right hand only anyway, so I would be curious why that would have to be closed or managed.
Because people could come out that and try to cross. That doesn't,
At an angle, is that,
At-
yeah, see what I mean, like they.
well,
go
they
on the
could
other
try to
side of the
cross
arm.
in the wrong area. The whole issue it's not a
protecting people from
logical,
themselves.
not a logical method of crossing. They're trying to take all risk out of the situation, if you will.
And full disclosure, since you've given me the opening, you know, I like to talk about trains. We have had multiple cars over the years that back out of those parking stalls, especially in the darker parts of the winter evenings, and have fallen onto the tracks. And we've had to stop trains and get, you know, fortunately, no one's ever been seriously injured to my knowledge. Looking at my chiefs back there, they're shaking their heads, not sure. But it has happened. It's happened several times in my tenure here. And so, but that means we have to shut all the rail traffic down. And one of the suggestions that was made repeatedly was, you guys need to close that entrance and not let people park back there to prevent that from happening again. Because remember, it's a significant drop off that platform. It's not like you're backing across tracks at grade. It's significant. I think it's at least 12, maybe 18 inches deep at some points. So, and there's no fencing there. So it's just another consideration.
And people do, I just saw a guy the other day, the arms just came down and he just went around him like this. He thought he could beat it. And so people
Yeah, I
Don't
didn't
do
think he
smart
saw me.
It's all about the removal of risk.
Well, what do y'all think?
Well, I don't profess to understand all of that completely, but with the wayside horn, that is not something that the engineer, that would be automatic?
Yes.
Okay, so,
It's tied into their system.
so
and
what
it's-
happens if that malfunctions and doesn't? That's the part, since
That's
there's
going to
not
send, it's going to send an
man-to-man-
alarm. We're going to
Yes.
know that's going to happen, and then he's
Yeah.
going to go, if he doesn't see the light,
Yeah.
I don't know all of the pieces of this, but he does have a light that tells him, hey, this is in an area where there's a wayside horn. I don't need to blow my horn.
Yeah. That's the part that troubles me.
And then he would need to blow his horn. But the other thing I do need to tell you, and you need to make sure you really understand this, is just because there's a quiet zone in place, just because you have wayside horns in place, no matter what you have in place, the engineer that is in charge of the train can at any time choose to blow the horn if he believes that the conditions are unsafe. And so there are going to be times, I would wager to say, and in fact, the gentleman in Lenexa told me, yes, even once you have it in place, there are going to be times when that horn gets blown. It's just that it's not as frequent as it was before.
So if that malfunctions and the engineer is relying on the setup that's there and it doesn't blow, somebody could get hurt.
But the arms come down.
Yeah, the arms will,
You'd have to have a double.
the arms come down, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
Just you won't hear.
you won't hear it.
And you're still going to see, still going to see the lights.
And he shouldn't be able to hear it either if he's coming from that direction. If it's the wayside direction. He
Who,
might-
the train?
Yeah.
Oh,
If
right,
he's
right,
in
right.
the train, he won't.
Yeah, it's shooting down the street
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Or sounding is a better term.
Well, my thoughts is we keep it on our list, but we gave up a lot of stuff in this last budget that I feel like are probably more important than this.
I'd have to say, even the $50,000 or $60,000, I really don't have an appetite right now, because I do think that we have some bigger fish to fry, so to speak, some higher priorities than this, especially if you get into, let's just say the actual cost to do the work would come into $1 million range. Well, we have a lot of $1 million items on our list coming up that I think have a higher priority than this. That's just my feeling. What do you think, Rich?
If we had the money to do it, I would say let's do it. We don't have the money to do it right now. I want it part of the next budget cycle. I want to see if we can fund it. I'd like to hear from residents to see if they pallet this amount of an expense, and it's great information to have. It's more information than we've had in the past, and it's great. So
Might be a good survey question.
Could be. Could be.
Yeah.
thank you for all your work on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
Very good.
Very much.
Suzanne.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We don't want you to think that you did all this effort for nothing.
No.
Very
Um,
much appreciated.
I understand.
Okay.
It's been educational for all of us, and it actually helps us articulate better to citizens when they call with concerns.
Yes.
Us too.
There's a
Yes.
whole lot involved.
Okay, next, we're going to go into executive session, then we'll come back and we'll do citizens forum. Somebody want to?
I move that the city commission recess into executive session to conduct discussions with legal counsel. The justification for closing the meeting is to consult with the city attorney to discuss matters privileged under the attorney-client relationship, and the time and place at which the open meeting shall resume,
Maybe 12:55.
12:55 here at the city commission chambers at City Hall.
I second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
we shall return.
No, get some hot tea after this.
Okay, executive session is over. There was no action taken. Our next item of business is Citizens Forum. We have Ed Myers. Ed, before you come up, I want to say that we intend to have a further, much more in-depth conversation towards the end of January in a work session, I believe, on water rates, and we want anybody from the public to be here. We want your input, but we're going to have a very much more in-depth conversation. So come on up, state your name, your address, and
My name is Edward Myers. Call me Ed. I live at 921 North Spencer Road. The first thing I'd like to mention is that I don't know if any of you guys have ever had a class in economics, but one of the principles of economics is that, well, first of all, you guys have a monopoly on water in Newton. We can't buy water from anybody else but from the city of Newton. And the Supreme Court has ruled that monopolies, when you are a monopoly and you raise a commodity like water, that is considered a tax. So instead of calling it water rates, we need to call it the water tax. And another principle of economics is that, you think that if you raise rates, you're automatically going to get more revenue. But that's not the case. If you raise rates as a commodity and as a monopoly, what happens is people use less water, less of that commodity. And what happens is you're thinking that revenue is going to rise, but in actuality, people use less of the commodity and revenues fall. So that's another issue you need to think about. There's a fallacy in your thinking that just because you raise rates, you're going to get more revenue. And that's not the case.
We did talk about that in a meeting, and we do understand that.
Okay, good. I'm glad you understand it. You understand economics.
Yeah.
So another issue that I have is that your job as commissioners, I know, is to benefit the citizens of Newton, to do what you can to promote to benefit the citizens. And I know that your staff has recommended water rate increase, and what's important is that you think in terms of how can I benefit the citizens of Newton? How can I promote growth? Just because your staff says, oh, we need a rate increase doesn't mean you have to, jump because they say, or you jump and say, how high do I need to jump? Because that's not the principle of, to me, of being a commissioner. You need to protect the citizens and the growth of the community. That's your main thinking, your main thought process, is to protect our citizens and the growth of our community. And another thing, we have a sizable amount of retired people in this city, people on fixed incomes. And, they can easily pack up and leave and find a lower cost place to live. I mean, people go to Florida all the time and Texas because they don't have income tax. So if we're known to have these water rates that are high and also have a reasonably high income, we just raised our property tax, people see that as not a place that they want to live. They want to live where the costs are lower to live. So this is a very important issue that you need to think about. And I think you need to increase the citizens' input in this issue. I understand that the city is paying for a polling firm. Is this correct?
Yes, sir. We are under contract with a firm called Flash Vote,
Okay.
I believe is the name of it. And we have the ability to generate pretty quick turnaround scientific surveys for the community. And that is actually one of the reasons we contracted with this particular agency, is because they are scientific in nature, but they can turn the responses around very quickly.
Good.
And that's something that the commissioners were planning to utilize this for already.
Yeah, and that's an issue that you need to bring out. Do the citizens want higher water rates? They should be asked that question. And are they willing to pay more for water? And I think that citizens' input is very important in this issue. That should be part of this polling firm question. Is are you willing to pay more for water? And another thing that we need to think about is the beautification of our city. Water rates at this point are high enough, and I see very few people in town that bother to have a decent lawn or even concerned about their trees and shrubbery because they can't afford. I've talked to people that say they can't afford to have a lawn. They can't afford to take care of their shrubs or their trees because the water is just too expensive. So beautification is another issue you need to think about. How do you want your city to look? And so we need to talk also about, the fact that in this country we're experiencing a 40-year high of inflation. Inflation is 40-year high right now. And it's not going down very fast. But when we raise their water rates and force people to pay more for water, we're just adding more to the inflation rate. And I just, I think people will see that Newton is not a very friendly place to live when we force people to move to other cities or other towns that are less expensive. I mean, I don't know what the water rates are in Heston or Sedgwick, Kansas, or some of these smaller towns, but I know their property taxes are cheaper. So that's another issue that I wanted to bring out. So that inflation is a very important thing to consider in how we look to other cities as being a lower cost of living. And we need to brag about the fact that Newton is a great place to live. We want to choose Newton, and if the cost of living here keeps going up, people aren't going to choose Newton. And I think the one thing I want to stress here today is that we need more citizens' input. How does the population of town, what is the general feeling about raising water rates? I don't think it's very good, but that's my opinion. That I don't think people, when they want to have a lawn or water their lawn or take a shower or even flush the toilet, are they going to think about their water rates every time they do that? And, they might even think about the commissioners that voted for it. So anyway, that's what I have to say today.
Thank you, Ed. Well, let's go around the horn. We'll start with you, Mr. Rich.
May I speak?
You may come up, state your name and address.
Okay. My name is Reggie Cooper. I live at 928 South Ash with my wife of 60 years, Rita Cooper. We've been citizens in this community since 1956. I'm just going to share with you, and this is not the city's fault. I appreciate your service, first of all, but my police retirement is controlled by the state of Kansas. It has nothing to do with the city. But what I'm going to tell you is what does happen is I've had no cost of living raises in my police retirement for over 25 years. How do I manage? We're not kids anymore. And the loss of income has been really devastating to us in this high rate of living. It's almost impossible. What do we choose? Food, medicine, or buy our water? my wife handed me this before I came up here. 6 months, 2 months in the summer, $156.40 for two people who barely watered our flowers. And you're going to raise it again, so it makes it more difficult? This gentleman that spoke is right. I live in a neighborhood, a really nice place to live. But it looks worse than it's looked for a long time because of the water. I've lost one tree I think is going to be gone, and that's because I couldn't water it enough to keep it going. It was a weeping willow tree. That probably doesn't mean much to some folks, but it was important to us. What I'm saying and asking is, consider those of us that are on fixed incomes. No additional income is available. The cost goes up and the income stays the same or less. We have to start making choices. And I hear people say, well, that's bad. We feel sorry for you. That don't count. Feeling sorry for me isn't me. And all I'm asking is consider the citizens of this community. I have visited around in our neighborhood. They're not excited about any kind of raises. Probably 10% or 15% of our neighborhood's retired people. It's great not to have to get up and go to work in the ice and snow, but the income doesn't go up either when you don't go someplace to work. And I've long past working part-time jobs. I just can't do it. So anyway, thank you for hearing me. Thank you for what you do. Please consider no raises of any kind in our water bill. It's more now than we can handle. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Reggie.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to thank the staff for all the work they do to get us the information that we asked for, some of it last minute and some of it long planned. Everything that's come before us today is all about information, so I really think it's good that we have the polling and the information cycle to try and get us more information. Thank you.
Excuse me, just a reminder that because New Year's falls on Sunday, the city facilities will be closed on Monday, and we will push out any utility pickup change information for trash and those kinds of things. So if you need something from us, we'll be open again for business Tuesday morning, bright eyed and bushy tailed.
Just a quick item follow-up from your last meeting on the de-annexation petition. Staff is meeting with the petitioner, Ron Harder, on that for some potential solutions. Hope to report back at your next meeting. It's in the works.
Well, just a big thank you to our first responders and our staff for making it all possible for us to represent the citizens of this community and make hopefully the wisest decisions that we can. Thank you.
I would encourage people to watch our meetings on Facebook. There's a lot of things that have been brought up that if people took the time to be informed, that they would know that we care. They would know none of us are for increase in water rates. If you take a survey, I can't imagine you'd get a single person that says they want to raise water rates or they want to raise taxes. But we don't control inflation. We work real hard at doing away with stuff that's not absolutely necessary. You know, I know that the senior citizens are hurt when things like this happen. But I would encourage. It just amazes me when I get home and I see that 7 people watch this on Facebook and I've been doing a series of videos with Harvey County Digital too that are very informative, and I haven't asked Leroy yet, but there's going to be one that I'm going to ask Leroy to participate in, and any of the other commissioners that want to. We are really interested in getting good information out there. We're really interested we're not making excuses. We're just telling people the way things are. Newton didn't get in the position that they're in right now overnight. It just happens over a period of time. The biggest problem that we have is that we failed to recognize that we needed economic and industrial growth, and our tax base has just been stagnant. In the last 15 years, or what a mill will bring in has gone up $30,000, roughly. And of that, only $1,800 of that $30,000 was funded by industry and economic development. So that's pitiful. That we haven't had any growth. We've really put a lot of time and effort in on the revenue side of this, not the water revenue side of it, but actually bringing in more people that pay tax. And that's the most important thing that we can do right now, and we're dead set on making that happen. And we're looking for really good people to come to the community, to be a part of our community. And that is the answer to the problem. And if that doesn't happen, then all of the inflational increases that happen, you know, Ed, you say that inflation is bad right now. With inflation affects the city too. I mean, everything we buy costs more, so we've cut stuff out of our budget that we normally buy. But the only way out of this is to bring new people to town that are going to increase the tax base. We've got quite a few houses being built right now. I know when you talk about raising water rates, it's gloomy and doomy, but there's a lot of really good things that are going on right now too. And we have a tendency to concentrate on the bad things that are happening, and I would urge the citizens to be informed and pay attention to the good things that are happening too, because there's a lot of good things that are happening. So that's
Yeah,
fine.
and I would just like to add to that, the importance of us bringing in commercial and industrial businesses to expand that tax base. Otherwise, what are we going to do? We're just putting the burden more and more on the on the homeowner. And we don't want to do that, because the commercial and industrial piece of our community, they pay at least a double the rate of the tax formula than the homeowner does. So that's why we need to expand that, because we don't want to put any more burden on the homeowner. And I guess I would also like to say, you know, all of us take this very, very seriously. And not a single one of us up here are tax and spend kind of people. Well, let's just willy-nilly raise it all. No, that's not who we are. We're homeowners, and we are members of this community just like everybody else. And we all have our home budgets, and you know, all of those things. And the other thing I think that does not go, you can't readily see it because it's below the surface. You know, we have examined many times various things to cut, and we have cut. We've cut personnel, we've cut methods of doing things. And so we look at all of that, and we take this very, very seriously. So enough about that. I would like to I hope that everybody here enjoys the rest of your holidays, and this meeting is adjourned.